we've experienced the Barbie side of things. Now it is the Heimer side of things. And I am with my resident astronomer, who also happens to be a board member of Amherst Cinema at his Amherst kitchen table, Hampshire College astronomer, Dr. Salman Hameed. Mr. Universe, you also experienced Barbenheimer this weekend, but you did Oppenbarbie.
That is correct. I went the opposite way.
Yeah.
Against the current, against the wind.
Well, let's get your thoughts, because Oppenheimer is a movie that we were going to talk about anyway, because it's a science movie. It is a movie about one of the most famous scientists of all time.
That is correct. So, can I have a rant
Yes.
for that? Thank you.
Please.
Because rant is the way to go these days. Like, if you're not ranting.
The kids love the rants.
Exactly. The problem is, there are two fascinating films by really interesting filmmakers, right? And you may not like it, or the movie, or filmmakers, whatever, but they're interesting, right? And my mistake was, I'm not on social media other than on Facebook, and occasionally I go there. So I'm old. So, that's what I'm telling you, okay? But, so I try not to be there too much on Facebook, so limit my time, but somehow I just got sucked in, and that's what happens, you get sucked in.
Yeah.
And you cannot avoid, you either have to love a movie or you have to be indignantly hate it, which to me, it was just bizarre. So on my feed, for example, there would be people who would be saying, oh, look, why are people going to Barbie? Oppenheimer is the best film ever. This tells you something about what's wrong with the world. Then you would have people, oh my goodness, Oppenheimer, why are we talking about this mass-killing, homicidal scientist and things like that? And somehow, I was thinking, but there are actually movies, and it's becoming hard. And by the way, I should mention, I shouldn't exclude myself out, because I would look at those and I'd be like, oh, fools! What kind of people are saying those things? I am much better than that. I'm thinking, hey, people should think about films and so on and so forth. But the problem, this is one of those issues that the social media issues, this is a broader rant, it forces you to a team to either be this way or that way and be passionate about it and not enjoy things.
I don't feel that way at all. I feel like there was a celebration of these two great movies. I never felt pressured to be in any one camp over the other. The only conundrum I had is which to see first.
I agree. Well, you should come to my feed. But the point is so anyway, so that aside, and I just think, especially with the Hollywood strike going on, with sort of the writers and actors now, this is a great example of interesting filmmaking, and I do get upset about sort of the Marvel films, most of the Marvel films and so on. So, oh, come on, they should be better. But still, they are entertainment, and it's important, and these two films were great too. So at a time when studios are exploiting filmmakers and exploiting writers, this is a great time to actually celebrate film. So,
and I've never seen a movie theaters more crowded. The Garden was so crowded in Greenfield for Barbie. I was south of Boston when I went to go see Oppenheimer over the weekend, and I had to sit in the front row. It was only one of 3 seats left, and I heard people in front of me asking, "What about the next showing? Sold out. What about the next showing? Sold out." So that's, for filmmaking and movie going, this is a big weekend.
And I think Barbie is playing every 5 minutes. If you can pick up, literally, you can go, 5 minutes, our next show is coming up. And it was still full.
Yeah.
No, it was a lot of fun. And seeing movies in a crowded theater where you can enjoy people's reactions, I absolutely love it. People laughing at Oppenheimer, I was like, wow, that is
I was
really
the only
funny.
one laughing at Oppenheimer. There were some funny moments in Oppenheimer. There's funny moments in every movie. And I'm that one guy that laughs and doesn't care if anyone else laughs.
Oh yeah, the mushroom cloud.
Yeah, that wasn't the part.
Oh, okay.
I did leave the theater after Oppenheimer and was really upset. I was really emotional. And I felt like I wished everyone else was. I felt bad. I was crying. It's the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of humanity, by some regards, that we've done this. We've created a bomb that killed so many people so quickly, and then followed it up with a bomb that could kill everyone so quickly.
Right. I think, so there is some, so if we just talk about the movie as a movie perspective, I think Oppenheimer does a fantastic job of presenting a nuanced take on a person. I mean, and again, you can agree or disagree what elements were emphasized or not. Nevertheless, it is not a propaganda film. It is not a simply an anti-war film or anti-bomb film per se, but it presents Oppenheimer in a complex light, which I absolutely love that part. I love one of my favorite films is Lawrence of Arabia, and historically, actually, that has a lot of problems. Oppenheimer is great in terms of history, but it's a complex portrayal. So that reminded me of that, that here Oppenheimer is, you cannot just put him into one category, and that is how humans are. And then there is a lot of care in the way the film is shot. I mean, Christopher Nolan, and again, this is one of those things people get divided over him. Is he overrated or not or whatever? But on the other hand, he does love films. He shoots it on, I think this one is done 65 millimeter, and he shoots it on location. So for example, this one, and I don't think there are spoilers here because people do know that this happened.
Yeah.
And so this was, and in New Mexico, the first test took place, and Los Alamos was there, and he shot it over there. And in fact, he used some of the places where Oppenheimer and his wife actually lived. So they did that. Some of the sort of scenes where scientists are reacting to that are actually in the same location because he wanted people to sort of to channel or to feel how scientists and people in Los Alamos felt. So those are some of the things I think are phenomenal at this time. And I saw it on XD, the biggest screen. And I would say, I mean, again, this is a movie, see it on the biggest screen possible because there are no CGI.
Yeah.
He actually used sort of actual shooting of effects rather than computer generated ones.
Didn't really create a nuclear bomb.
I don't know. It's a secret. By the way, if you can hear him, this is a contribution as a sidekick from Wookie.
Yeah, Wookie the dog is ranting now about Wookie's thoughts on Oppenheimer.
So I think to that set aside, I mean, I think, and I have seen the critique that, well, I mean, there are problems with films as well. I mean, and I think one of the things is whether he should have shown, and again, I'm not sure if it's a spoiler or not, sort of the explicit footage of the impact of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and so on and so forth. Set all that aside. You and I right now are talking about nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. You and I are talking about the impact of what happened, how nuclear bombs were made. And I think, and this kind of conversations are taking place, and those are taking place because of this film. I hate to say this. I mean, there are a lot of people who are really worried, and they do bring these things up. But in the broader mass conversation, the movie Oppenheimer is bringing these up, that this is crazy that we have those. This was crazy that the bomb was built, and then the bigger bomb was built, the hydrogen bomb, and the fact that 2 bombs were dropped. And I think that in itself, in some ways, is worth it. It justifies the film, and it says something about great filmmaking.
And it brings up this conundrum that you go through the film with Oppenheimer to try to understand. Does the United States need to drop the bombs so that no one else will ever drop the bombs? No one else has ever dropped the bombs. There are some things that you earnestly have to wrestle with that go against everything in my moral fiber to say, Oppenheimer perhaps had this clarity of thought that if we create these bombs and they are never used, we will never know how bad it will be if we use them, and then the next war, we'll all use them all at the same time. Unless we drop these bombs now to show how bad they are as a deterrent. And then Oppenheimer's whole rest of his life is sort of geared towards talking about the dangers of nuclear war. I don't agree with all of that mentality, but it certainly brings up some interesting conundrums. And I will also say, I mean, this has Oppenheimer and Barbie both have to do with personal existential crises and what you as an individual can do to overcome them.
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of pivot a little bit in a different direction, and that's why it's good to have disagreements,
Yeah.
and to enjoy disagreements. But what I would say is, Yes, but we are in the thick of it. I mean, I don't think to say that people haven't used it doesn't mean that they are not going to be used. I mean, it's not that far back that the bomb was built. Okay, so 1945 when it was dropped. Um, so if we look at the state of the world today, I think what Oppenheimer hoped, and Oppenheimer is again no doubt and no hero either, because he actually never really apologized for the dropping of bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And just for people who haven't seen Oppenheimer or about the historical context, I mean, one of the things is that the bomb was being built, the whole justification was because Germany was building it, and they thought that Nazi Germany, if they build it, they are going to use it. And Germany had been defeated by the time bomb was ready, and yet it was dropped, but not on Germany, but on Japan. So, and not just once, twice. So there are a lot of other various aspects to that. And again, it boggles my mind, like, the Hiroshima bomb was dropped to maximize the impact because it was dropped at 8:43, I think, or something like that in the morning. So to maximize kids going to school and so on and so forth. So, I mean, that all aside, we did not stop making the bombs. And so if you talk about today, and by we, I mean the world has over 13,000 nuclear bombs. And a lot of them are much, much bigger than what was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And even in the US. So, and since we are here in the US, so we can actually talk about that perspective. US has about over 5,000 nuclear weapons, and over 1,600, close to 1,700, are deployed. Right. Okay.
Ready to go at a moment's notice.
Well, a really short notice, so they can be launched. So some of them are the silo launched ones. They are in various silos. Those can be launched in a few minutes. And then the submarine ones, and I think the US has about 10 nuclear armed, not nuclear submarines. These are nuclear armed submarines. There are 10 of them. And even the kind of weapon that is, if I remember correctly, it is sort of like 7 times the destructive power of Hiroshima. Actually, no, of all the bombs dropped in World War II.
Wow.
Including the 2 nuclear bombs, right? And that is just one submarine. There are 10, and then there are other bombs. And with the nuclear armed ones, they can be launched in 15 minutes. And that's the US side. Russia has around the same. So they also have around close to 1,700 deployed. And of course, it's not just US and Soviet Union or Russia after that. You also have UK, you have France, China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. So you have plenty of nuclear weapons. The question is like, can there be a mistake? You don't even have to think in terms of using it deliberately, because we know we have come close to many times where during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there are cases where, or at least there is one case where it was sort of like, at the hands of one commander, right? It's like so the Soviet, and who decided not to react to that. Same thing happened in 1983. So there is this Russian duty officer, Stanislav Petrov, and he was the one who was responsible for seeing. So this is at the height, sort of like in the 1980s of the Cold War, and his responsibility was to see if the US has launched any weapons or not. And because you have to immediately react, and you have to react fully because it's an existential thing. And he detected that there was a launch. And he detected that there was a second launch, third, fourth, and fifth. There were 5 launches. And he had the responsibility to inform up the command to say, you go ahead and launch 2, because the US has launched a nuclear strike. He just froze. And he was like, I'm not going to do that. And he just froze. And after 20 minutes later, he's like, well, I haven't heard anything. It must have been a false alarm. And I think we are having this conversation because it was a false alarm. But this is how close it can get. So can this happen? We have just sort of like, you have the match and you have all the fuel that you need. And we're just saying, hey, at least nobody has used it yet, but we are playing with the match with the fuel around, and I actually do think that unless we eliminate them, we are going to end up one way or the other, accidentally or otherwise, using them.
One thing that the Oppenheimer film talks about after he's created these bombs and realizes how dangerous they are, I don't know if it's a spoiler alert because I learned this in high school. I should say a big shout out to my high school history teacher, Mr. Bartek, who really put Oppenheimer on my map when I was in high school. And, I remember the first thing I think of is I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, which he learned from Sanskrit, which comes up in the movie. I remember the idea that when they tested the bomb, there was the potential they could destroy the whole world with the test, and they went ahead with it anyway. But Oppenheimer goes forward in the rest of his life and tries, knowing that we've unleashed this power and that there is no putting this genie back in the bottle, to try to get the international community on board about what to do here, and fails.
Yeah, and so that, by the way, I mean, there are some fascinating aspects to it that.
So spoiler alert: we didn't do a good job. I mean, but I don't think that's a spoiler. I think we all know. I mean, this is the case.
But Oppenheimer, by the way, learned Sanskrit at college.
Right.
Like, he just learned it.
He learned Dutch. He was an autodidact. He was a polymath. He was all that good stuff.
And
I'm reading the book now, American Prometheus. I got it out of the library immediately, and it's fascinating. Adds even more layers to the movie.
And he talks about, there is a wonderful clip. Not wonderful. Okay, so again, we are talking about sad thing in some sense. But there is a clip of Oppenheimer. I think it's from 1965. There is an interview on CBS. So there is a short clip where he actually talks about this, and he has tears in his eyes. And he talks about sort of like, that we knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few people cried, most people were silent. And then he says about that, I remembered the line from Hindu scripture Bhagavad Gita. And that's when he says, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. And then he says, I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
So, I mean, he knew the gravity of it, and yet he did it, right? I should also mention Richard Feynman, for example. He was a much younger scientist at the time. He has a minor appearance in it on the drums, actually, when they are celebrating it. And he wrote about it later, that after the bomb, it was like he became deeply depressed. And partly he says he would go to New York City and he would see people building bridge, working on a bridge, and he would be like, what's the point? Like, this is all going to get destroyed anyways. So why are people constructing things, and so on and so forth? So there are these elements of, I mean, I think the deeper question in that is, what is the role of scientists? I mean, in some sense, Oppenheimer also gave him an out to a certain degree when he says, well, we just build it, then it's up to the politicians to do what they do. Which I'm not clear whether that is the case. I mean, you still have a responsibility, and again, scientists also ought to know what is the right thing and what is not the right thing. I mean, we are right now talking about AI, for example, the destructive capabilities and so on and so forth. So I don't think scientists should be making decisions for all of humanity. But I think washing their hands off and saying, hey, we are just interested in this thing and we don't care because rest of it is to somebody else. No, if you know what something can do, I think it is your responsibility to think about your actions regarding that. So I don't think there should be an out regarding that.
Do you think people should watch Barbie and then Oppenheimer, or Oppenheimer and then Barbie? I watched Barbie and then Oppenheimer, and now I'm going to be contemplating the destruction of all of humanity for a long time. If I watched Barbie afterward, maybe it would rinse my mouth out.
I agree with you. I watch the other way. But two other things before we go. I do want to point out that even when we talk about 2 nuclear weapons that were dropped, but it's not just 2. There have been about 2,000 nuclear tests that have been performed, including the first one, Trinity, that was in New Mexico. And by the way, I went to graduate school in New Mexico, so not that far from there. And just recently, there is a paper out that said that the impact of the Trinity test was much bigger than they anticipated. And in fact, it was just a couple of days ago in New York Times, actually, there was an article about that now with newer modelings, that they are finding out that actually it impacted 46 states and Canada and Mexico.
Like with radiation?
Yeah, with sort of like, radioactive fallout from there. And you can also see with the smoke, like, that how now we are figuring it out, sort of like, how broad it can go. But forget even about that. Within 150 miles of the test site, there were 500,000 people, 500,000 people that lived over there. They were given no warning. They were not evacuated before or after the test. And in most cases, like in this New Mexico case, it's on indigenous lands. So there is this whole element that there have been tests conducted. U.S. has conducted close to about 1,000 tests since then. And Russia has done it, France. And I should also mention that oftentimes the tests are conducted in places of like, sort of marginalized communities. So U.S. has conducted tests in indigenous lands. U.S. and England have conducted tests in South Pacific. So the Bikini Atoll and others sort of like, areas. France conducted its tests in Algeria, its colony at that time. Russia has done in Kazakhstan, and China done that where the Uyghurs are, and so on and so forth. So it's not just that component that, nuclear weapons have not been used again. Nuclear weapons have been tested, and there is a test ban treaty, so that's great. But it's, again, so I fall under, I just think that prevention bit is, it's unclear whether that justification makes sense or not. And I'm saying that coming from Pakistan as well, because there was a big question, because when India tested nuclear bomb in in the early 1970s, the prime minister at the time, Bhutto, who was Benazir's dad, he had said that, well, we are going to eat grass if we have to, but we are going to build a bomb. And Pakistan did build a bomb, and the response was, hey, because India has it, so Pakistan should have it. And then India and Pakistan tested bombs again, Pakistan for the first time in the late 1990s. And so, and you can argue what you were saying, like, there is a justification. Okay, so, well, does that prevent war? So let me end this conversation, if you want to end it. It's like Daniel Ellsberg, whose papers now are at UMass, and it is just so amazing that Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon papers about Vietnam, that he chose UMass to house his papers. He recently passed away, and he also talked a lot about nuclear weapons. And in fact, in the 1960s as well, he was talking about that actually people don't know what US's stances are. So, for example, even now with Trump and now under the Biden administration, US actually opposes no first use policy. Meaning to say US reserves the right to use a nuclear weapon before it has been used on the US. So meaning to say it's more strategically it can be used. And it's actually pretty broad, because it says sort of like, that in the nuclear posture review, that's what it's called, like, that the validity of using nuclear weapons in extreme circumstances to defend vital interests of the US or its allies and partners. So this is again not a deterrent. This is actually the US policy that it can use it first as well. And so Daniel Ellsberg, actually, I was reading his interview, and he said he grappled with that question, and he talked about that in the 1980s. His father, when he was sort of like talking to him, and he asked this question, and this is his quote, and this is from a Daniel Ellsberg interview, that there are those who would say that it makes it less likely to have the overall cataclysm if you have the ability to blow things up. That will make it less likely that it will ever go off at all. So this is exactly what you said, right? And
Not what I believe, but what
Right.
I said.
and his father's response, which I think is just so incredible, and again, I had not thought about it in that way either. And he says that his father responded to it, and he says, yes, but there is a moral cost to having this capability at all. It is not just a matter of a risk and a cost of blowing the world up. There is a moral cost in telling yourself and teaching your children that there are circumstances that would justify killing everything, and therefore that would justify having this capability. And I think there is clarity in that. And again, Carl Sagan had also talked about nuclear weapons, that we would say, hey, we are a product of star stuff, or we are a way of the universe for knowing itself. Here we are a collection of atoms. Here is this universe 13.5 billion years ago it started, and there was evolution here on the planet, and then here we are. And those atoms, we destroy all the other species as well, not just ourselves, but we have the ability to destroy most of the other species. There is a moral, I think, that moral component, I think there is that conversation that ought to happen. It's not just about deterrence. And again, coming from Pakistan, it was also justified, hey, because India has it, we have to have it. But I think this moral component is important. And Daniel Ellsberg, there is a project at UMass now where it is focusing on different aspects of Daniel Ellsberg's thinking. And one of that is on existential threats. And it focuses on nuclear weapons and climate change. So, it's just so great to be in an area where actually there is a very local connection to these topics. And
not to mention the fact that a two-time Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Ira Helfand, who's been on our show, lives in Northampton and has been talking about the disarmament of the planet and the nuclear treaty that some nations have signed on, none that have nuclear weapons.
International campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. ICAN.
It comes from our valley here. So this, I hope, people will leave Oppenheimer the way that I did, feeling so desperately sad and scared for the world, because we are closer to nuclear annihilation now than even at that time. And I hope people leave Barbie and want to stick it to the patriarchy.
And nuclearchy.
Yeah, there we go.